Stephen Covey and the Principles of an Effective Life. Morning. We've come a long way together. Carnegie taught us to connect with others. Maslow mapped what we need to grow. Bandura showed us how to believe in our own capability. Mihaly described what full engagement feels like. Dweck explained how to survive failure. Goldman taught us to manage our emotions in real time. Each piece is genuinely valuable, but stack them all up, and the quiet question remains: what actually holds your whole life together, day after day, decade after decade? Today, we close this arc by asking that exact question, not about a single skill, but about the foundation underneath all of them. We arrive in 1989 with Stephen Covey, an American educator and consultant, publishing what would become one of the best-selling personal development books in history, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Covey was writing after a striking observation. He had spent years studying nearly 2 centuries of American success literature and noticed a sharp shift over time. Success, right in before the 1930s, he found focused heavily on what he called character ethic, integrity, humility, courage, patience. Built slowly over a lifetime, success frightened after that point, including much of what we've already discussed in this series, increasingly emphasized what he called personality ethic, technique, image, quick fixes, and persuasive skill. Covey set out to deliberately return to the older foundation, arguing that technique without character eventually collapses under its own weight. Covey's central claim was the lasting effectiveness rests on principles, durable, largely universal truths. Life, like fairness, honesty, and integrity, rather than on situational techniques that might work in one moment and fail in the next. His 7 habits build deliberately on top of one another. Be proactive, taking responsibility for your responses rather than blaming circumstances. Begin with the end in mind, clarifying your deepest values before acting. Put first things first, organizing daily action around genuine priorities rather than mere urgency. The next 3 habits shift outward. Think win-win, seeking mutually beneficial outcomes rather than one-sided victory. Seek first to understand, then to be understood, listening with genuine intent before advocating for yourself, directly echoing Carnegie's earliest insights, and synergize, combining differing strengths and perspectives into outcomes, better than any individual could produce alone. The 7th habit, sharpen the saw, is renewal itself, continuously reinvesting in your physical, mental, social, and spiritual capacity. So the other 6 habits remain sustainable rather than eventually burning out. Sociologically, Covey's framework offered a quiet critique of an entire era of personal development, including much of what came immediately before in this series. He argued that a culture increasingly obsessed with quick influence tactics and image management, however psychologically sophisticated, risked producing people who were skilled at appearing trustworthy without actually building the deeper trust that durable relationships, institutions, and communities require. This connects directly to sociological ideas about social capital, the trust and reciprocity that hold communities and organizations together over time. Covey argued that principle-centered individuals operating with consistent integrity become the very foundation that functioning families, teams, and institutions are built on, while technique without character quietly erodes that same foundation, one shortcut at a time. Psychologically, Covey's model integrates much of what we've already covered into a single coherent architecture: proactivity, draws directly on Bandura's self-efficacy, the belief that your response, not just your circumstance, is within your control. Beginning with the end in mind echoes Maslow's self-actualization, demanding real clarity about your deepest values and purpose. Seeking first to understand requires the empathy Goldman described, and sharpening the saw acknowledges that sustainable effectiveness requires ongoing renewal, not simply willpower alone. What Covey added that was genuinely distinct was the insistence on sequence and integration. Character, in his model, must be established internally through habits, 1 through 3, before it can be reliably extended outward into relationships and collaboration. In habits, 4 through 6, skipping that internal foundation, he argued, produces exactly the kind of hollow charisma that eventually fails under real pressure. But Covey's framework has drawn general criticism too. Critics note the 7 habits can feel prescriptive and somewhat formulaic, reducing something as complex as well into a numbered checklist that risk the same oversimplification. Covey himself criticized in earlier success literature. Some have also pointed out an underlying religious and cultural specificity. Covey's own Mormon faith and distinctly American corporate influence worldwide shaped the framework's assumptions about individual responsibility and family structure in ways that don't translate identically across all cultures and circumstances. There's also a structural critique familiar from earlier in this series. Principle-centered living assumes a degree of individual agency and stability that isn't equally available to everyone. Someone facing severe poverty, discrimination, or crisis might find begin the end in mind considerably harder to practice than someone with greater existing security and resources. Why does the 1989 book still matter today? Because Covey's language, win-win, proactive, synergy, sharpening the saw, has become genuinely embedded in how modern workplaces, families, and even schools talk about effectiveness and collaboration. His insistence on character over mere technique offers a useful corrective to a digital culture increasingly built around personal branding and created image, echoing the Frankfurt School's old warning about performance replacing authenticity, but redirected toward personal practical guidance rather than pure critique. This emphasis on renewal also anticipates the modern conversation around burnout and sustainable performance. Sharpening the saw was in many ways an early articulation of what we now call work-life balance and holistic well-being, decades before those became standard workplace vocabulary. So here we complete the particular arc. We began with Carnegie's simple, practical insight that connecting generally with others matters more than most people assume. We move through Maslow's map of growth, Bandura's belief in capability, Mihaly's full engagement, Dweck's resilience, and Goldman's emotional skill. And we end with Covey's insistence that all of it must ultimately rest on something steadier than any single technique, consistent character, chosen deliberately and renewed continuously. What ties this entire journey together is a single thread, much like the one that ran through our exploration of communication theory. Psychology kept insisting that growth is never just information, it is belief, emotion, and experience, built and rebuilt inside a person trying to become more fully themselves. And sociology kept insisting that none of this happens in isolation. Every belief, every habit, every moment of growth is shaped by and shapes in turn the relationships and communities a person is part of. Every idea in this series answered a version of the same enduring question asked from a different angle. What actually allows a human being to grow, connect, and thrive? As that question keeps meeting new circumstances, new technologies, and new generations, it remains as open and as worth asking directly as it was earlier in 1930. Thank you very much and see you next time.